In the shadowed library of Thornfield Hall, a priceless 15th-century grimoire, the Codex Arcanum vanishes from its locked case, sparking a web of suspicion among a nervous librarian, a charming widow, a cunning book dealer, and an obsessed scholar. Only Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eye for human nature, can unravel the clues. Blue silk threads, an oiled window, and a scholar slip to reveal the thief who sought to claim the book's ancient secrets. In 30 seconds, a tale of greed, deception, and quiet brilliance unfolds, drawing you into an Agatha Christie mystery where no detail is too small to crack the case. Chapter 1. The vanishing volume. Thought and mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of Thornfield Hall as it loomed at the edge of the village. The Elizabethan manor, with its gabled roofs and ivy-clad walls, was a monument to quiet grandeur, its private library the envy of bibliophiles across England. Sir Henry Grayson, its owner, had retired from diplomatic service with a fortune and a passion for rare manuscripts, none more cherished than the Codex Arcanum, a 15th-century grimoire bound in blackened leather, its pages whispering of alchemical mysteries. On this particular October morning, however, the air in Thornfield Hall was not of scholarly reverence, but of sharp dismay, for the grimoire had vanished. Miss Jane Marple, summoned by a breathless telegram from Sir Henry, stepped lightly from the village cab, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel drive. Her black felt hat, adorned with a single feather, sat neatly atop her white hair, and her knitting bag swung gently at her side. To the casual observer, she was merely a spinster of advanced years, her mild blue eyes and delicate frame suggesting nothing more than a fondness for tea and gossip. Yet those who knew her Sir Henry among them understood that her mind was a steel trap, catching the smallest inconsistencies in human behavior. Sir Henry greeted her at the door, his face ashen beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. "Miss Marple, thank heaven you've come," he said, ushering her into the oak-paneled hall. "It's a catastrophe. The Codex got stolen from its case sometime in the night." His voice trembled, less with anger than with the shock of betrayal, for the theft had occurred under his own roof. Miss Marple patted his arm gently. "Now, Sir Henry, let us not leap to despair. Tell me everything, from the beginning, and leave nothing out." Her tone was soothing, but her eyes, bright and unyielding, were already scanning the hall for clues: a misplaced umbrella, a scuff on the polished floor, anything that might whisper of the night's events. They moved to the library, a vast room lined with mahogany shelves, where the scent of old leather and wax polish hung heavy. At its center stood a glass case, its lock intact, but the pane nearest the latch shattered, jagged edges glinting in the morning light. The velvet cushion within was bare, a silent accusation. "This is where it was kept," Sir Henry said, gesturing helplessly. "Under lock and key, always. I showed it to my guests last evening only, a few trusted souls. By dawn, it was gone." Miss Marple approached the case, her gloved fingers hovering over the broken glass without touching it. "No fingerprints, I presume?" she asked, her voice deceptively casual. "None," Sir Henry confirmed. "The police inspector Dalloway from the county examined it an hour ago. He says the thief wore gloves. The window over there was found ajar, but there's no sign of entry from outside. The frost on the lawn is untouched." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the tall mullioned window. The latch was old but sturdy, its hinges gleaming faintly, as if recently tended. She filed this away, her mind already threading connections. "And your guests, Sir Henry, who was here last night?" He hesitated, as if loath to suspect those he'd welcomed. "For, besides myself, Clarence Poole, my librarian, who's been with me for years, Mrs. Evelyn Hartley, a friend of my late wife, visiting from London, Roland Vance, a dealer in rare books, who came to appraise the Codex, and Professor Julian Whitmore, a scholar of medieval texts, who's been studying the grimoire's history. They all saw it, handled the case, admired it. I can't believe any of them would. His voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign of her private amusement at human naivety. People, Sir Henry, are capable of surprising things when desire takes hold. Now, tell me about this Codex Arcanum. Why is it so coveted? Sir Henry's eyes lit with a scholar's zeal. It's a marvel, Miss Marple, written by an unknown alchemist. It contains formula, some say for transmuting lead to gold, others for elixirs of life. Its script is half in Latin, half in cipher, undecoded for centuries. Whitmore believes it holds secrets no one has yet published. Vance valued it at £10,000, but to a collector or a scholar it's priceless. Miss Marple. Needles clicked softly as she drew her knitting from her bag, settling into a high-backed chair. Priceless, she murmured, and thus a magnet for greed or ambition. I shall need to speak with your guests, Sir Henry, and Mr. Poole as well. Separately, if you please, and perhaps a cup of tea while I think. As Sir Henry rang for the housekeeper, Miss Marple's eyes returned to the shattered case, then to the window, then to the shelves, where a faint gap suggested a book recently removed and replaced. She said nothing, but her mind was already at work, sifting through the possibilities, as delicate and relentless as her knitting. In St. Mary Mead, no secret stayed buried long, not when Miss Marple was near. Chapter 2. The cast of characters, the library of Thornfield Hall, with its heavy drapes and flickering firelight, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a stage set for secrets. The air held a faint chill, despite the hearth's glow, as if the theft of the Codex Arcanum had left a void beyond the physical. Sir Henry Grayson, still shaken, had arranged for his guests and librarian to gather in the oak-paneled study adjacent to the library, a room less grand but no less imposing, with its leather-bound tomes and a long table polished to a mirror's sheen. Miss Marple settled into a wing-back chair, her knitting bag at her feet, her needles poised like a conductor's baton. She had requested to meet the suspects one by one, but first she wished to observe them together, to catch the unspoken currents that flow between people when guilt hovers near. Sir Henry, ever the courteous host, stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Miss Marple, he began, his voice steadying with effort. These are the individuals who were present last night when the Codex was last seen. I trust them all, but, well, the facts speak for themselves. His eyes flickered with unease, betraying his diplomatic training, which prized harmony over suspicion. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of gentle encouragement, though her gaze was as sharp as a hawk's. Quite so, Sir Henry, let us meet them, and perhaps we shall find clarity in their words. Her tone was mild, but her mind was already cataloguing the room's details. The faint scent of lavender from a vase of dried flowers, the ticking of a grandfather clock, and the way the light caught the dust motes, disturbed by recent movement. First to enter was Mr. Clarence Poole, the librarian, a wiry man in his late 40s with a stoop that suggested years bent over manuscripts. His tweed jacket was impeccable, but his fingers, stained with ink, betrayed his trade. His eyes, magnified by round spectacles, darted nervously to the empty chair opposite Miss Marple before settling on the floor. A muscle in his cheek twitched, a tic that seemed to pulse with his unease. He carried a ledger under one arm, as if it were a shield, and his greeting was a mumbled, "Good morning, Miss Marple, a dreadful business, this." Next came Mrs. Evelyn Hartley, a widow whose elegance seemed to defy the somber mood. She was perhaps 40, though her artful makeup and sleek auburn hair suggested a younger spirit. Her black silk dress, ostensibly morning attire, was cut with a modern flair, clinging to her form in a way that drew the eye. A sapphire brooch gleamed at her collar, its facets catching the firelight, and her smile, when she offered it to Miss Marple, was both warm and calculated. "I do hope you can resolve this, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and musical. "It's quite unsettling to think a thief was among us." Mr. Roland Vance followed, a man whose presence seemed to fill the room despite his average stature. The rare book dealer was in his early 50s, with slicked back hair and a mustache that curled at the ends, giving him the air of a stage magician. His suit was tailored, his cufflinks gold, and his pocket watch, which he consulted with a flourish, was an antique of evident value. "A tragedy for scholarship," he said, his tone smooth as velvet, "and for Sir Henry, of course. I examined the codex yesterday, such a loss." His eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, then slid away, as if unwilling to linger. Last was Professor Julian Whitmore, a scholar whose intensity seemed to hum beneath his scholarly veneer. Tall and gaunt, with a shock of gray hair and deep-set eyes, he carried himself like a man perpetually on the verge of a revelation. His tweed suit was rumpled, his tie askew, as if he had dressed in haste. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped, "this theft is an outrage. The Codex Arcanum is irreplaceable, its secrets unplumbed. Whoever took it has robbed the world of knowledge." His hands clenched, and Miss Marple noted the tremor in them, as if his passion for the book bordered on obsession. The four stood awkwardly, their positions forming a loose semicircle around Sir Henry, who gestured for them to sit. Miss Marple, however, remained standing, her knitting in hand, her needles moving with a soft rhythmic click that seemed to punctuate the silence. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "I find it helpful, in such matters, to understand the people involved. Perhaps you might each tell me a little about your evening, and what brought you to admire Sir Henry's treasure." The request, so politely framed, was met with a ripple of tension. Poole's tick quickened, Mrs. Hartley's smile tightened. Vance's fingers strayed to his watch, and Whitmore's eyes narrowed. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was a whirl of observation. She noted the way Poole's ledger was clutched too tightly, as if he feared its contents might betray him. Mrs. Hartley's posture was perfect, but her left hand toyed with her brooch, a nervous gesture. Vance's polished demeanor seemed a mask, his movements too deliberate. Whitmore's intensity was almost palpable, his gaze darting to the door, as if longing to escape or to conceal. Sir Henry, eager to break the silence, spoke first. "We dined together at 8, he said. "A simple affair, soup, pheasant, and a claret from my cellar. Afterward, I invited everyone to the library to view the codex. It was a rare treat, you understand. I don't often display it, but Mr. Vance wished to appraise it, and Professor Whitmore had expressed such keen interest." He paused, his brow furrowing. "We were there perhaps an hour, discussing its history. By 10, we retired to our rooms, so I thought." Miss Marple nodded, her needles never pausing. "And who handled the codex itself?" Sir Henry hesitated. "I unlocked the case myself, to show its pages. Mr. Vance examined it closely, as did Professor Whitmore. Mrs. Hartley admired its binding, and Mr. Poole, of course, is familiar with it, having catalogued it years ago. But the case was locked again before we left. I'm certain of it." "Certain," Miss Marple echoed softly, her tone devoid of judgment. She turned to Poole, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Mr. Poole, as librarian, you must know the library's every corner. Did you notice anything unusual last night?" Poole adjusted his spectacles, his fingers trembling slightly. "Nothing, Miss Marple. I locked the library at midnight, as always. I checked the windows, the doors, everything was secure. I went to my quarters in the east wing afterward. I heard nothing, saw nothing." His voice was earnest, but the tick in his cheek betrayed a deeper unease. Miss Marple noted a faint blue thread on his cuff, barely visible against the tweed. It was an odd detail, one she tucked away for later. Mrs. Hartley spoke next, unprompted, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm afraid I'm of little help, Miss Marple. After the library, I felt restless and took a walk in the gardens. The night was crisp, the stars quite lovely. I saw no one, though I thought I glimpsed a shadow near the library window as I returned. It was fleeting, perhaps my imagination." Her smile was apologetic, but her eyes held a flicker of something else, defiance, perhaps, or calculation. Miss Marple observed the sapphire brooch again, noting a similar blue thread caught in its clasp, glinting faintly. Mr. Vance leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "I retired early, Miss Marple, after the library visit. The codex was magnificent, of course worth a fortune to the right buyer. But I was in my room by 10, reading. I heard nothing unusual. His tone was too smooth, his words too rehearsed." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on his pocket watch, which he had checked twice in as many minutes. Its ornate design suggested more than mere timekeeping or compartment, perhaps, for a tool or key. Professor Whitmore's response was sharp, almost indignant. "I was in my room, writing notes on the codex. Its cipher fascinates me undecoded, even now. I went to bed late, perhaps 1 in the morning. The theft is a travesty, Miss Marple. That book holds secrets that could rewrite alchemical history." His passion was genuine, but his hands, clasped tightly, betrayed a nervousness that belied his scholarly fervor. Miss Marple noted his inkless pen, resting on the table, and the absence of papers, unusual for a man claiming to write late into the night. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft click of Miss Marple's needles. She let the silence stretch, knowing how it unsettled the guilty. Each suspect's story was plausible, yet each held a crack, a sliver of doubt. Poole's nervous tick, Mrs. Hartley's vague shadow, Vance's overly polished account, Whitmore's trembling intensity, they were pieces of a puzzle, not yet aligned. She thought of her village, St. Mary Mead, where secrets were often hidden in plain sight, in the small gestures and half-truths of ordinary people. "Thank you all," she said at last, her voice as gentle as a grandmother's. "You've been most helpful. I shall need to speak with you individually, of course, to clarify a few points. But for now, I think a cup of tea would do us all good." She smiled, her eyes crinkling, but her mind was far from tea. The blue thread, the oiled window latch, the missing book's weight, in someone's luggage, these were threads she would weave together, slowly, meticulously. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple remained by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that people were like books. Their covers rarely told the whole story. Here, in Thornfield Hall, she had 4 such books to read, each with a hidden chapter. The Codex Arcanum was more than a book, it was a catalyst, drawing out greed, ambition, or desperation. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp mind, was determined to uncover which. Chapter 3. The scene of the crime, the library of Thornfield Hall, bathed in the pale light of an overcast afternoon, seemed to Miss Jane Marple a place where secrets clung to the shadows. The room was vast, its high ceiling coffered with dark oak, its walls lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries-old volumes. The air carried the musty scent of aged paper, tempered by the faint tank of beeswax from the polished floor. At the room's heart stood the violated glass case, its shattered pane a jagged wound in the otherwise orderly space. Miss Marple, her knitting bag slung over one arm, moved with the deliberate grace of a woman who knew the value of observation, her eyes missing nothing. Sir Henry Grayson hovered near the door, his hands fidgeting as he watched her approach the case. "Inspector Dalloway has been over it all, Miss Marple," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "He's convinced it's an inside job, but beyond that, he's at a loss. The police are still searching the grounds, though I doubt they'll find much." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was already dissecting the scene. "Inspectors are thorough, Sir Henry, but they sometimes overlook the small things. Let us see what the library has to tell us." Her tone was gentle, almost conversational, but her gaze was as sharp as the glass shards before her. She circled the case, a sturdy affair of mahogany and tempered glass, designed to protect its contents from dust and curious hands. The lock, an intricate brass mechanism, was untouched, its keyhole gleaming as if polished. The broken pane, however, told a different story. The glass had shattered inward, fragments scattered across the velvet cushion where the Codex Arcanum had rested. Miss Marple bent closer, her gloved hand hovering over the debris, careful not to disturb it. "No fingerprints, you said?" she asked, glancing at Sir Henry. "None," he confirmed. "Dalloway used his powder and brushes, nothing but smudges. As if the thief wore gloves." "Gloves," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking softly as she drew her knitting from her bag. A sensible precaution, but not infallible. Her eyes traced the edges of the broken glass, noting a faint scratch near the lock, barely visible unless one knew to look. It suggested a tool, perhaps a thin blade, used with precision. She filed this away, her mind turning to the suspect's capabilities. Mr. Poole, with his meticulous nature, would know the case's workings. Mrs. Hartley's nimble fingers, adept at pinning her brooch, could manage delicate tasks. Mr. Vance's trade required tools for handling rare books, and Professor Whitmore, with his knowledge of medieval mechanisms, might understand such locks better than most. She moved to the window Sir Henry had mentioned, a tall casement set in the library's west wall. Its latch was old, its iron worn smooth by years of use, but it moved with a fluidity that caught her attention. She pressed a finger to the hinge, finding it slick with oil freshly applied. "This was opened recently," she said, more to herself than to Sir Henry, "and maintained with care. Curious, for a window rarely used." Sir Henry frowned, peering over her shoulder. "Poole checks the windows nightly, or so he says. But the frost outside, no footprints, no disturbance. Dalloway thinks it rules out an outsider." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a faint smile that held no mirth. "Frost is a poor witness, Sir Henry. It tells us only that no one trod heavily. A careful thief, or one who never left the house, might leave no trace." She glanced at the lawn. Beyond, its silvery sheen unbroken, but her mind conjured images of a rope, a ladder, or simply a door left ajar elsewhere. The window, she suspected, was a distraction, its oiled latch a deliberate clue. Turning back to the room, she surveyed the shelves, their rows of books standing like silent sentinels. One shelf, near the case, caught her eye, a gap, ever so slight, where a volume seemed out of place, its spine misaligned by a fraction. She approached, her fingers brushing the leather binding of a folio on heraldry. It was heavy, but it slid out easily, revealing a faint scuff on the shelf's edge, as if something had been dragged across it. "Has anything else been taken?" she asked, her tone deceptively mild. Sir Henry shook his head. "Nothing, as far as Poole can tell. He's been cataloguing the collection for years, knows every book by heart." "Every book," Miss Marple echoed, her eyes lingering on the scuff. She replaced the folio, noting its weight, and considered the possibility of a hiding place, a book hollowed out, or a panel concealed. The library was a warren of possibilities, and a thief with access could exploit them all. She moved to the fireplace, its embers glowing faintly. A poker rested against the hearth, its tip clean but slightly bent, as if used for something other than stirring coals. She knelt, peering into the grate, where a trace of ash seemed finer than the rest. "Almost like paper," "Has the fire been tended since last night?" she asked. "The maids cleaned it this morning," Sir Henry replied. "They found nothing unusual." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. A thief might burn evidence, a note, a wrapper, but paper ash was distinct, and this trace was too small to be conclusive. She rose, her knees creaking slightly, and turned her attention to the floor. The Persian rug, rich with reds and golds, showed no obvious marks, but near the case a single thread caught her eye, glinting in the light. It was blue silk, fine and out of place against the rug's pattern. She bent to retrieve it, holding it between gloved fingers. "Curious," she said softly, slipping it into her pocket. Sir Henry watched, his brow furrowed. "Do you think it's important, Miss Marple?" "Everything is important until it isn't," she replied, her smile disarming. "A thread, a scratch, a latch, these are the alphabet of a crime, Sir Henry. We must learn to read them." She stepped back, taking in the room as a whole. The library was a fortress of knowledge, yet it had been breached with surgical precision. The thief had known the case's lock, the window's quirks, the house's rhythms. This was no impulsive act, but a plan, calculated and bold. Her thoughts drifted to her village, St. Mary Mead, where she had once solved a theft by noting a gardener's muddy boots, misplaced in a spotless kitchen. Here the clues were subtler but no less telling. "Sir Henry," she said, her needles resuming their rhythm, "I should like to see the rooms where your guests and Mr. Poole slept, and perhaps a word with the maids, if they're about. Small details, you understand, often illuminate the larger picture." He nodded, eager to assist. "Of course, Miss Marple. Anything you need. The police have searched the rooms, but they found nothing. No book, no tools." "Police searches are thorough," she said, "but they look for what they expect to find. I look for what's unexpected." Her eyes twinkled, but her mind was a whirl of possibilities. The blue thread, the oiled latch, the scuffed shelf, each was a note in a melody she was beginning to hear. The suspects, with their polished stories and hidden tensions, were players in a drama, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and relentless curiosity, was determined to uncover the script. As they left the library, she cast a final glance at the shattered case, its emptiness a challenge. The Codex Arcanum was more than a book. It was a motive, a magnet for desires unspoken, and in Thornfield Hall, where trust had been broken as surely as the glass, Miss Marple knew the truth lay not in grand gestures, but in the small, overlooked details that only she could see. Chapter 4. The Librarian's Tale. The study of Thornfield Hall, where Miss Jane Marple had arranged to speak with Mr. Clarence Poole, was a smaller, cozier room than the library. Its walls lined with maps and maritime prints that spoke of Sir Henry Grayson's diplomatic travels. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow over the leather armchairs and a low table set with a silver tea service. Miss Marple sat near the window, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm, the soft click a counterpoint to the ticking of a mantel clock. Her eyes, however, were anything but soft as they studied the librarian, who perched uneasily on the edge of a chair, his ledger balanced on his knees like a talisman. Mr. Poole was a man of precision, his tweed jacket buttoned tightly, his spectacles polished to a gleam. Yet his hands betrayed him, one clutching the ledger, the other twitching toward his cheek, where a muscle pulsed with nervous regularity. The blue silk thread Miss Marple had noticed earlier still clung to his cuff, a detail she had not yet mentioned but kept firmly in mind. She poured tea, her movements deliberate, and offered him a cup with a smile that invited confidence. "Mr. Poole," she began, her voice as gentle as a village vicar's, "you must be dreadfully shaken by this theft. To lose such a treasure from your carrots, quite a blow, I imagine." Poole took the cup, his fingers trembling slightly, the saucer rattling. "It's a disaster, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but fervent. The Codex Arcanum was the jewel of Sir Henry's collection. I've tended it for years, checked its case daily, ensured its pages were never exposed to damp or light. To think someone breached the library under my watch. He trailed off, his tic intensifying, and sipped his tea as if to steady himself. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her needles never pausing. You locked the library at midnight, you said. A routine, I presume. Yes, every night, Poole replied, his eyes fixed on the tea. I make a circuit of the room windows, doors. The case itself. Everything was secure last night. I swear it. His voice held a note of desperation, as if he feared blame more than the theft itself. And after locking up, she prompted, her tone encouraging, but her gaze sharp. You went straight to your quarters. Poole hesitated, his fingers tightening. On the ledger. I did. The east wing, just past the servants' stairs. I read for a bit catalogue notes. Nothing more, and was asleep by 1. His eyes flicked to hers, then away, as if wary of scrutiny. Miss Marple's smile remained, but her mind was sifting his words. The east wing was close to the library, a mere corridor away, easily accessible in the dead of night. She thought of the oiled window latch, the absence of footprints, and the precision of the theft. You must know the library's every secret, she said lightly. Its locks, its quirks. Did you notice anything amiss yesterday, perhaps during the evening? When the guests viewed the codex, Poole's tick pulsed again. Nothing unusual. Sir Henry unlocked the case himself, as he always does for guests. Mr. Vance examined the binding, Professor Whitmore the pages. Mrs. Hartley just looked. I stood by, as I always do, to ensure no damage was done. When they left, I checked the case before Sir Henry locked it. It was secure. His voice was firm, but his hands betrayed him. One straying to adjust his spectacles unnecessarily. Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. A rare interruption, and the window. Mr. Poole. You checked it, you said, was it often oiled? He blinked, caught off guard. Oiled, I suppose it might be. The housemaids maintain the fittings, but I checked the latches for security. It was closed tight last night, I'm certain. His tone was less certain than his words, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush creeping up his neck. She leaned forward, her eyes kind but unrelenting. You've been with Sir Henry many years, I understand. A position of trust. It must be trying to feel that trust questioned. Poole's flush deepened, and he set the teacup down with a clatter. It is, Miss Marple. I've served Sir Henry faithfully 10 years, cataloguing every book, preserving his collection. To think I'd be suspected. He shook his head, his tick now a rapid flutter. I'd never harm the codex. It's my life's work to protect such things. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of understanding, though her mind was elsewhere. The blue thread on his cuff was a puzzle too fine for his tweed, too deliberate in its placement. She thought of Mrs. Hartley's sapphire brooch, where a similar thread had caught, and wondered if it was a coincidence, or a clumsy attempt at misdirection. Poole's proximity to the library, his knowledge of its locks, made him a candidate. Yet his distress seemed genuine, his fear not of guilt, but of disgrace. Tell me, Mr. Poole, she said, her voice softening. Did you see any of the others? After the library visit, Mrs. Hartley, perhaps, in the gardens, or Mr. Vance, lingering near the hall. Poole's eyes widened slightly, as if the question surprised him. No, Miss Marple. I saw no one. Mrs. Hartley mentioned her walk, but I was in my room by then. Mr. Vance and Professor Whitmore, I assumed they retired, as they said. His voice faltered, and he added, almost as an afterthought, though I did hear footsteps in the corridor, late, perhaps 12:30. I thought it was a servant, checking the lamps. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind latching onto the footsteps. The east wing corridor connected the library to the guest quarters. A path any of the suspects might have taken. Footsteps, she mused, light or heavy, hurried or slow. Poole frowned, thinking. Light, I'd say, not rushed, like someone walking carefully. He seemed to realize the implication and hastened to add, but it could have been any one maid's footman. The house is old, creaks all the time. Of course, Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. She sipped her tea, letting the silence stretch, knowing how it could coax out truths. Poole shifted, his ledger slipping slightly, revealing a page marked with a hasty scrawl knot, the neat script she'd expected from a man of his precision. She made a mental note to inquire about his cataloging later, perhaps with the maids, who saw more than they were credited for. As Poole rose to leave, his relief palpable, Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the blue thread. One last thing, Mr. Poole, she said, her tone almost apologetic. Your cuff, there's a thread caught there. Silk, I believe. Do you often wear such fine materials? He froze, glancing at his sleeve, then rubbed it as if to dislodge. The thread owed that. Must have caught it somewhere brushing against a curtain, perhaps. I don't wear silk. His laugh was forced, and the tick in his cheek danced wildly. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. Curtains can be troublesome, she said lightly. Thank you, Mr. Poole. You've been most helpful. As he departed, his ledger clutched tightly. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting a steady rhythm. Poole's story held water, but there were leaks: his nervousness, the thread, the footsteps. She thought of her neighbor in St. Mary Mead, old Mr. Clement, whose anxious ticks had betrayed a hidden debt, not a crime, but a secret nonetheless. Poole's fear might stem from guilt, or it might be the terror of a loyal servant facing ruin. The thread, though, was a clue, linking him to Mrs. Hartley's brooch, and perhaps to the library itself. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and glanced out the window at the frost-covered lawn, still untouched. The theft was an inside job, she was certain, but the thief had planned carefully, leaving threads literal and figurative to mislead. Her mind turned to the other suspects, each with their own motives, their own opportunities. The Codex Arcanum was a prize worth risking much for, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to unravel the truth, one stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The guests charmed the drawing-room of Thornfield Hall. Where Miss Jane Marple had chosen to meet Mrs. Evelyn Hartley was a study in faded elegance. Its velvet curtains, once a rich crimson, now softened to a dusky rose, framed tall windows that overlooked the frost-dusted gardens. A chandelier gleamed dully above, its crystals catching the weak afternoon light, while a fire burned steadily in the marble hearth, casting shadows that danced across the room's ornate wallpaper. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet precision, the soft click a counterpoint to the distant chime of a clock striking 3. Her eyes, bright and unyielding beneath her serene expression, were fixed on the door as Mrs. Hartley entered, her presence as striking as a portrait brought to life. Mrs. Hartley was a woman who commanded attention without effort. Her black silk dress, tailored to accentuate her graceful figure, rustled softly as she moved, and her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, not a strand out of place. The sapphire brooch at her collar gleamed, its blue facets a vivid contrast to her morning attire, and Miss Marple noted again the faint thread of blue silk caught in its clasp, a twin to the one on Mr. Poole's cuff. Mrs. Hartley's smile was warm, her green eyes sparkling with a charm that seemed to invite confidences, yet there was a calculated edge to her poise, as if every gesture had been rehearsed. Miss Marple, she said, her voice low and melodious, how kind of you to take on this dreadful affair. I do hope I can be of some help. She settled into a chair opposite, crossing her ankles with the grace of a dancer, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sapphire brooch caught the firelight, drawing Miss Marple's eye once more. "You're most kind to spare the time, Mrs. Hartley," Miss Marple replied, her tone as gentle as a village gossip sharing news over tea. "It's a troubling business, this theft, and I find it best to hear everyone's account in their own words. You mentioned a walk in the gardens last night. Perhaps you could tell me more." Mrs. Hartley's smile widened, though her eyes remained watchful. "Of course. I couldn't sleep after dinner. Too much excitement, I suppose. Seeing the Codex Arcanum. Such a fascinating book, though I confess I'm no scholar. I decided a stroll might clear my head. The gardens are lovely, even at night, with the moonlight on the roses." She paused, her fingers brushing the brooch absently, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, wondering if it was habit or nerves. "The moonlight," Miss Marple echoed, her needles clicking steadily. "It must have been bright, to see the roses so clearly. Did you walk far?" Mrs. Hartley tilted her head, as if considering. "Not terribly far, just the main path, near the library wing. I was out perhaps half an hour, maybe less. It was chilly, so I wore my shawl." She gestured to an imaginary wrap, her movements fluid. "As I returned, I thought I saw a shadow near the library window, a flicker. Really, it was gone before I could be sure. I assumed it was a servant, perhaps, checking the shutters." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with a smile, though her mind was sifting through the words. The shadow was a convenient detail, vague enough to be unverifiable, yet specific enough to deflect suspicion. She thought of the oiled window latch, the unbroken frost outside, and wondered if Mrs. Hartley's stroll was as innocent as she claimed. "A shadow," she said softly. "How curious. Did you mention it to anyone when you returned?" Mrs. Hartley shook her head, her auburn hair catching. "The light? No. It seemed trivial at the time. I went straight to my room, first floor, overlooking the lawn. I was asleep by 11, I should think." Her tone was casual, but her fingers lingered on the brooch, twisting the blue thread slightly, as if unaware of its presence. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing briefly as she poured tea from the silver pot, offering a cup to Mrs. Hartley. "You must have been close to the library, then, if you saw the window. Did you hear anything, footsteps, perhaps, or voices?" Mrs. Hartley accepted the cup, her movements graceful but deliberate. "Nothing, I'm afraid. The night was so still, just the rustle of leaves. I wish I'd paid more attention, but I was lost in my thoughts." Her smile was apologetic, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's for a moment before drifting to the fire. The silence that followed was one Miss Marple cultivated, knowing how it could unsettle. She watched Mrs. Hartley sip her tea, noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on the cup. The story was polished, almost too perfect, and the shadow felt like a flourish added for effect. Miss Marple thought of her friend Mrs. Bantry, whose tales of garden walks often hid more practical motives, like checking on a wayward guest. Mrs. Hartley's charm was a shield, but shields could crack. "You admired the Codex last night," Miss Marple said, shifting the subject smoothly. "Sir Henry mentioned you were taken with its binding. Are you a collector, Mrs. Hartley?" Mrs. Hartley laughed, a light, musical sound. "Heavens, no. I appreciate beautiful things, but books like that are beyond me. The Codex was exquisite, such intricate leatherwork, those odd symbols. I touched the case, just to feel its age. But I left the scholarly talk to Mr. Vance and Professor Whitmore." Her eyes sparkled, as if sharing a private jest. But Miss Marple caught a flicker of calculation beneath the charm. "The case," Miss Marple said, her tone musing. "It must have been a thrill, to be so close to such a treasure. Did you notice anything about Ithalok, perhaps, or the glass?" Mrs. Hartley's smile faltered. just for a moment. The lock. No, I'm not one for mechanics. It looked sturdy, I suppose. Sir Henry opened it, and we all peered in. I didn't touch the lock itself. She set her cup down, her movements careful, and Miss Marple noted the absence of a rattle. She was steady now, as if regaining control. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind turning to the blue thread. It was identical to the one on Poole's cuff, and its presence in the brooch suggested a connection, deliberate or accidental. She thought of the shattered glass, the scratch near the lock, and wondered if Mrs. Hartley's nimble fingers, so adept at pinning her brooch, could wield the tool with equal skill. Her garden walk placed her near the library at the critical hour, and her shadow story felt like a distraction, too neatly aligned with the open window. "You've been a guest here before, I understand," Miss Marple said, her voice as soft as a lullaby. "You must know the house well, the gardens, the corridors." Mrs. Hartley's smile returned, though it was less radiant now. "A few times, yes. My late husband was a friend of Sir Henry's. The gardens are my favorite. Those roses are divine. The house is a maze, though. I still get lost sometimes." She laughed again, but it sounded forced, and Miss Marple noted the slight shift in her posture, as if bracing for the next question. "A maze, indeed," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Old houses are full of surprises, aren't they? Hidden corners, unexpected sounds. Did you hear anything last night, perhaps on your way back from the gardens?" Mrs. Hartley hesitated, her fingers brushing the brooch again. "Nothing specific. The house creaks, old beams, settling floors. I thought I heard a door close, perhaps, but it was faint. I didn't think much of it." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the window, as if seeking escape. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, though her mind was alight with possibilities. The door closing, the shadow, the thread, these were fragments of a pattern, not yet complete. She thought of a young woman in St. Mary Mead, whose charming tales of midnight walks had hidden an affair, not a theft, but the principle was the same. Charm could cloak deceit. Mrs. Hartley's elegance was a performance, and Miss Marple was determined to see behind the curtain. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley," she said, her smile warm. "You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you longer, though I may need to speak again, to clarify a point or two." Mrs. Hartley rose, her movements fluid, and offered a parting smile. "Of course, Miss Marple, anything to help poor Sir Henry." As she left, the sapphire brooch glinted once more, the blue thread a silent accusation. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting a steady rhythm. The thread linked Mrs. Hartley to Poole, and perhaps to the library. But its placement felt too obvious, like a breadcrumb left to mislead. The shadow story was flimsy, the garden walk a convenient alibi. Mrs. Hartley's charm was her weapon, but Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence and keen eye for detail, knew that even the most polished facades could crack under scrutiny. The Codex Arcanum waited, hidden somewhere in Thornfield Hall, and Miss Marple was one step closer to finding it. Chapter 6. The dealer's gambit. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Thornfield Hall's morning room, casting a golden glow over the chintz-covered furniture and the delicate porcelain figurines on the mantel. Miss Jane Marple sat near a bow window, her knitting needles moving with their customary rhythm, the soft click blending with the distant cawing of rooks in the garden. The room, with its air of genteel comfort, seemed an odd setting for an interrogation, yet Miss Marple preferred such spaces for their disarming effect. She had asked to meet Mr. Roland Vance, the rare book dealer, here, where the cozy atmosphere might loosen his guarded demeanor. As he entered, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor, she observed him with the keen eye of one accustomed to reading character in the smallest gestures. Mr. Vance was a man who wore his profession like a well-tailored suit. His gray pinstripe was immaculate, his mustache trimmed to a theatrical curl, and his gold cufflinks gleamed with understated wealth. He carried himself with the confidence of a showman, yet there was a wariness in his dark eyes, as if he sensed the room's tranquility was a trap. His pocket watch, an ornate antique, dangled from a chain, and he consulted it with a flourish as he took his seat, as if time were his ally. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished mahogany, "I'm at your service. A terrible loss, this theft. I hope I can shed some light." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as warm as a village tea party. "How kind of you, Mr. Vance. I do find that a fresh perspective can illuminate even the darkest corners. You were here to appraise the Codex Arcanum, I understand. Perhaps you could tell me about your evening, your impressions of the book, and what followed." Vance leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, his watch chain glinting. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. I dined with Sir Henry and the other's excellent pheasant, by the way. Afterward, we adjourned to the library to view the Codex, a remarkable piece, 15th century, Italian in origin, I'd wager. The binding alone, blackened leather, tooled with alchemical symbols, could fetch thousands at auction. I examined it closely, with Sir Henry's permission, of course. We discussed its value, its history. By 10, I retired to my room, first floor, west wing. I read for a bit market reports, nothing exciting, and was asleep by 11. His smile was practiced, his words flowing like a well-rehearsed script. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes crinkling with interest. "You must have a keen eye for such treasures, Mr. Vance. To handle a book like the Codex, it must be thrilling. Did you notice anything about the case itself? Its lock, perhaps?" Vance's fingers strayed to his watch, spinning it absently. "The case. Solid mahogany, glass panels, a decent lock for a private collection. Nothing extraordinary, but secure enough. Sir Henry opened it, and I checked the book's condition pages intact, no foxing. I didn't touch the lock myself." His tone was casual, but his eyes flicked to hers, as if gauging her reaction. She nodded, pouring tea from a silver pot, the steam curling in the air. "And after the library, you went straight to your room?" "Straight as an arrow," Vance replied, accepting the cup with a nod. "The house was quiet, no disturbances. I'm a light sleeper, mind you, but I heard nothing, no footsteps, no creaks. A pity, as I might have caught the thief in the act." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow, and Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw. The silence that followed was one she wielded like a tool, letting it press against his composure. She thought of a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper, Mr. Tuttle, whose glib assurances had once masked a pilfered ledger. Vance's polish was similar, his story too smooth, like a book with no creases. Her eyes drifted to his pocket watch, its intricate design suggesting more than mere timekeeping. "That's a fine watch, Mr. Vance," she said, her tone admiring. "An antique, I presume." "Such pieces often have clever mechanisms, hidden compartments." Perhaps. Vance's smile faltered, his fingers stilling on the watch. "A family heirloom," he said quickly. "Swiss, 8th century. Just a timepiece, nothing more." He tucked it into his waistcoat, as if to shield it from scrutiny, and Miss Marple's mind latched on to the gesture. A compartment could hold a lockpick, a blade, tools for a thief skilled in delicate work. "You must know many collectors, Mr. Vance," she continued, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. "The Codex would tempt many, I imagine. Have you ever encountered it before, perhaps in your travels?" Vance sipped his tea, his movements deliberate. "Never in person, though I've heard of it. A legend in my trade rumored to hold alchemical secrets, though I'm no scholar like Whitmore. I deal in value, not mysteries. Sir Henry asked me to appraise it, and I estimated £10,000, perhaps more, to the right buyer." His eyes met hers, bold now, as if daring her to probe further. Miss Marple's needles paused, a rare interruption, as she leaned forward slightly. £10,000, she murmured. A fortune. And yet, you retired early, with such a prize. So near. You didn't linger, perhaps, to take another look. Vance's chuckle was smoother this time, but his fingers twitched toward his watch again. Tempting, but no. I'm a professional, Miss Marple. I don't sneak about at night. Besides, the case was locked when we left Sir Henry saw to that. His tone was firm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of unease. She nodded, her smile unwavering, though her mind was racing. A maid's comment, overheard that morning, had placed Vance near the library at dawn, adjusting his cufflinks by the corridor window. It contradicted his claim of early retirement, and the watch, with its potential for hidden tools, was a clue she couldn't ignore. She thought of the scratch near the case's lock, the precision of the theft, and wondered if Vance's expertise extended beyond appraisal to larceny. The library must be familiar to you, she said, her tone musing. You've visited Sir Henry before, I believe. A few times, Vance admitted, his voice still smooth. He's a valued client. I've appraised other items in his collection, manuscripts, incunabula. The library's a marvel, but I'm no librarian like Poole. I stick to my trade. His smile was back, but it didn't reach his eyes. And Miss Marple noted the slight sheen of perspiration on his brow. And last night, she pressed, her voice as soft as ever, did you see any of the others after the library? Mrs. Hartley, perhaps, on her garden walk, or Mr. Poole, checking his locks. Vance shook his head, his watch chain glinting as he shifted. No one. I was in my room, as I said. The house was silent, too silent, perhaps for a thief to slip through, unnoticed. He leaned forward, his tone confiding. If you ask me, Miss Marple, the culprit, knew the house well. That lock wasn't forced, it was picked clean as a whistle. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. A professional touch, you think? How interesting. She let the words hang, watching his reaction. Vance's smile tightened, and he sipped his tea, his fingers steady now, as if he'd regained his footing. The silence stretched, broken only by the fire's crackle and her needle's rhythm. Miss Marple thought of the blue thread, the oiled latch, the maid's sighting of Vance at dawn. His story was polished, but there were cracks: his watch, his presence near the library, his knowledge of locks. She recalled a St. Mary Mead jeweler, whose suave demeanor had hidden a penchant for pilfering gemstones. Vance's trade gave him motive and means, but was he the thief, or merely a convenient suspect? Thank you, Mr. Vance, she said at last, her smile as warm as ever. You've given me much to think about. I may need to speak with you again, to clarify a detail or two. Vance rose, his bow practiced. Any time, Miss Marple. I hope you catch the scoundrel. He checked his watch once more, a reflex, and left the room, his footsteps echoing in the hall. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting a steady rhythm. Vance's gambit was clear: present a flawless facade, deflect with expertise. But the watch, the dawn sighting, the lock's precision, these were threads in her growing tapestry. The Codex Arcanum was a prize that could tempt a dealer to risk his reputation, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to see if Vance Polish hit a thief's heart. Chapter 7. The Scholar's Obsession. The conservatory of Thornfield Hall, where Miss Jane Marple had arranged to meet Professor Julian Whitmore, was a glass-walled haven of greenery, its air heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. The late afternoon light, filtered through the misted panes, cast dappled shadows across the tiled floor, where potted ferns and a small fountain created an illusion of tranquility. Miss Marple sat on a wicker chair, her knitting needles moving, with their unerring rhythm, the soft click blending with the gentle trickle of water. The setting was deliberate, a place where one might let down one's guard. Yet her eyes, sharp beneath their mild exterior, were fixed on the door as Whitmore entered. His tall frame stooped, as if bearing an invisible weight. Professor Whitmore was a man consumed by his work. His gray hair was disheveled, his tweed suit rumpled as if he'd slept in it, and his deep-set eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to vibrate in the still air. His hands, long and bony, trembled slightly as he clutched a leather notebook, its edges worn from constant handling. He offered Miss Marple a curt nod, his voice clipped as he spoke. "Miss Marple, I hope this won't take long. The theft of the Codex Arcanum is a travesty, and I'd rather be assisting the police than sitting here." Miss Marple's smile was as gentle as a village grandmother's, but her gaze was unrelenting. "I appreciate your time, Professor Whitmore. A scholar's perspective is invaluable in such matters, particularly with a book as singular as the Codex. Perhaps you could share your recollections of last night, your time in the library, and what followed." Whitmore sat stiffly, his notebook resting on his lap like a shield. "Very well. We dined at 8 Sir Henry's usual fare, nothing remarkable. Afterward, he invited us to the library to view the Codex. It's a masterpiece, Miss Marple. Text, ciphered passages, alchemical diagrams that could unlock centuries-old secrets. I studied it closely, with Sir Henry's permission, noting its script and symbols. We left around 10, and I went to my room's second floor, east wing. I worked on my notes until 1, perhaps later, then slept." His voice was fervent, almost reverent when speaking of the book, but his hands tightened on the notebook, betraying a nervous energy. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're clearly passionate about the Codex, Professor. It must have been thrilling to see it up close. Did you handle it yourself?" Whitmore's eyes narrowed, a spark of indignation flaring. "Handle it? No." Sir Henry turned the pages. I observed, made mental notes. The Codex is fragile vellum ink, prone to fading. I wouldn't risk damaging it. His tone was sharp, but his fingers trembled, and Miss Marple noted the dry inkwell on the table beside him, its pen clean, untouched. By recent use she poured tea from a delicate porcelain pot, offering him a cup with a smile. "Such dedication to your work. You must have been eager to study it further. Did you return to the library at all, perhaps to reflect on what you'd seen?" Whitmore's jaw tightened, and he set the notebook aside, as if distancing himself. "From it return, no. I was in my room, writing. The Codex is complex, its cipher resists all known methods. I was sketching its symbols, trying to piece together their meaning." He paused, his eyes darting to the fountain, then back to her. "I heard nothing, saw nothing. The theft is an outrage, a loss to scholarship." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was sifting through his words. The dry inkwell, the clean penthese contradicted his claim of late-night writing. She thought of the blue thread, the oiled latch, and the maid's mention of footsteps in the east wing, where Whitmore's room was located. His passion for the Codex was undeniable, but was it scholarly zeal or something more possessive? She recalled a St. Mary Mead vicar, whose obsession with rare hymns had led him to borrow manuscripts without permission. A small sin born of fervor. "Your notes must be fascinating," she said, her tone musing. "To decipher such a book would be a triumph, wouldn't it? A legacy for a scholar." Whitmore's eyes lit up, his voice rising. "A triumph, yes. The Codex holds secrets, formulas, perhaps for transmutation or longevity. No one has cracked its cipher, but I'm close. I've cross-referenced it with medieval texts, alchemical treatises. Another month, and I could publish something groundbreaking." His enthusiasm faltered, as if he'd said too much, and he leaned back, his hands clenchying. Miss Marple's needles paused, a subtle signal of her focus. "Close to a breakthrough," she murmured. "How fortunate you had time to study it. Did you share your theories with the others? Mr. Vance, perhaps, or Mrs. Hartley?" Whitmore shook his head, his expression darkening. "Vance is a profiteer, not a scholar. He sees only pounds and shillings. Mrs. Hartley's a dilettante, charmed by pretty bindings. And Poolwell, he's a caretaker, not a thinker." I kept my thoughts to myself. His tone was dismissive, but his trembling hands betrayed a deeper agitation. She sipped her tea, letting the silence stretch, knowing how it could coax out truths. Whitmore shifted, his notebook slipping slightly, revealing a page with hurried sketches symbols that matched those Sir Henry had described in the codex. She filed this away, her mind turning to the parcel the postmistress had mentioned, sent by Whitmore to a London publisher days before the theft. Was it a draft, a sample, or something more incriminating? "You must know the library well," she said, her voice as soft as ever. "Its layout, its locks. Did you notice anything unusual last night, perhaps when you left?" Whitmore's eyes flicked to hers, then away. "Nothing. The case was locked, the room secure. Poole was fussing about, as usual. I didn't linger." His voice was curt, but his hands betrayed him, one straying to the notebook, as if to protect it. Miss Marple's smile remained, though her thoughts were racing. The dry inkwell, the sketches, the parcel, these were pieces of a puzzle, and Whitmore's intensity was the thread that bound them. She thought of the scratch near the case's lock, the precision required to pick it, and wondered if his knowledge of medieval mechanisms extended to such skills. His obsession with the codex was a motive, one that could drive a scholar to desperate acts. "One last thing, Professor," she said, her tone almost apologetic. "Your room is near the East Wing corridor, I believe. Did you hear anything in the night? Footsteps, perhaps, or a door?" Whitmore hesitated, his fingers tightening on the notebook. "Footsteps, perhaps. The house is old, full of noises. I was focused on my work, didn't pay attention." His voice was strained, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush on his gaunt cheeks. She nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Old houses do creak, don't they? Thank you, Professor Whitmore. You've been most helpful." He rose abruptly, clutching his notebook, and offered a stiff bow. "I hope you find the thief, Miss Marple. The codex must be recovered." His eyes burned with fervor as he left, his footsteps heavy on the tiles. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting a steady rhythm. Whitmore's obsession was palpable, his story riddled with gaps, the dry inkwell, the sketches, the parcel. She thought of a St. Mary Mead schoolmaster, whose passion for rare coins had led him to pilfer from a museum, not for profit but for possession. Whitmore's desire to unlock the codex's secrets could be a similar spur, one that might override his scruples. The Codex Arcanum was a siren's call, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to follow its echo to the truth. Chapter 8. A Village Whisper, the village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the gentle folds of the countryside, was a tapestry of quiet routines and sharp-eyed observers, where secrets, like dust, seldom settled undisturbed. Miss Jane Marple, having left the grandeur of Thornfield Hall for the afternoon, walked along the high street, her black felt hat tipped against the October breeze, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. The air was crisp, scented with wood smoke, and the faint tang of apples from a nearby orchard, and the cobbled path echoed softly under her sensible shoes. She had come to the village not for tea or gossip, though both were inevitable, but to tap the invisible network of St. Mary Mead, where maids, shopkeepers, and postmistresses saw more than they were credited for. Her first stop was the post office, a narrow shop with a bell that jingled as she entered. Miss Pym, the postmistress, was behind the counter, her spectacles perched on her nose as she sorted letters with the precision of a clockmaker. A woman of 60, with a memory as sharp as her tongue, She was a repository of village comings and goings. Miss Marple, she greeted, her eyes brightening with curiosity. Heard you're up at the hall, sorting out that stolen book business. Dreadful, isn't it? Miss Marple smiled, her expression as warm as a fireside chat. Dreadful indeed, Miss Pym. I thought you might have noticed something, being so central to the village's pulse. Parcels, letters, people reveal themselves. In small ways, don't they? Miss Pym's lips twitched, sensing a chance to share her knowledge. Well, now, I did see something odd. That Professor Whitmore, the one staying at the hall, he sent a parcel to London 3 days ago, to a publisher, mind you. Heavy it was, wrapped in brown paper, and he was particular about it being sent express. Seemed nervous, kept looking. Over his shoulder, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. Not saying it's the book, of course, but it's queer, isn't it? Miss Marple's needles, tucked into her bag, seemed to itch for motion, but she kept her hands still, her mind latching onto the detail. Very queer, she murmured. A publisher, you say? Did you catch the name? Blackwood and Sons, in Bloomsbury, Miss Pym replied, proud of her recall. I wrote it down, as I always do for express parcels. He paid extra for speed. Which isn't like him, he's usually tight with his pennies. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes crinkling with appreciation. The parcel, sent before the theft, could be a draft of Whitmore's research or something more incriminating, perhaps a plan to secure the Codex Arcanum's secrets. She thought of his trembling hands, his dry inkwell, and the sketches in his notebook, each a thread in the tapestry she was weaving. You're a marvel, Miss Pym, she said, her tone genuine. Anything else catch your eye? Visitors to the hall, perhaps? Miss Pym's eyes gleamed. Well, there was a delivery van yesterday, from a London bookbinder. Dropped off some supplies for Mr. Poole, or so the driver said. And Mrs. Hartley's been getting letters, fancy ones, with a crest. Didn't see the sender, but she collects them herself, which isn't usual for a lady like her. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind turning to Mrs. Hartley's sapphire brooch and the blue thread that linked her to Poole. The bookbinder's delivery was curious. Poole hadn't mentioned it, and supplies could conceal tools, or even a hiding place. She thanked Miss Pym, promising to stop by for tea soon, and stepped back into the street, her thoughts buzzing like the bees in the village's rose gardens. Her next stop was the butcher's, where young Tommy, the delivery boy, was sweeping the step. A lanky lad of 16, with a knack for noticing what others missed. He grinned at Miss Marple's approach. Afternoon, Miss Marple, up at the hall, are you? Heard about the book? Proper mystery. That Miss Marple's smile was encouraging, her voice as soft as a lullaby. A mystery indeed, Tommy. You're often about the hall, delivering for Mr. Grayson. Did you see anything last night? Anyone near the gates? Perhaps. Tommy leaned on his broom, his eyes bright with importance. Funny you ask, Miss Marple. I was late with a delivery, some chops for the cook, and as I was leaving, round midnight, I saw a cloaked figure by the south gate. Couldn't see their face, but they were moving quick, like they didn't want to be seen. Thought it was odd, but I didn't linger. Expects me home, sharpish. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. A cloaked figure, she mused. Tall or short? Man or woman? Tommy scratched his head. Hard to say. Tallish, I reckon, but the cloak hid their shape. Could have been anyone. Professor Whitmore's lanky, ain't he? Or Mr. Vance, though he's shorter. Didn't see no skirts, so maybe not Mrs. Hartley. He shrugged, his youthful nonchalance masking the weight of his observation. She nodded, slipping him a shilling for his trouble. You've a sharp eye, Tommy. Keep it that way. As she walked on, her mind turned to the south gate, a secluded entrance near the library wing, far from the main drive. A cloaked figure suggested stealth, and Whitmore's height matched Tommy's vague description. Though Vance's cunning could not be discounted, Mrs. Hartley's garden walk, she noted, had been on the opposite side of the house, casting doubt on her shadow story. Her final stop was the tea shop, where Mrs. Clement, the proprietor, was arranging scones behind the counter. A stout woman with a gossip's ear, she greeted Miss Marple with a knowing smile. "Miss Marple, you're on the hunt, aren't you? That book theft's got the village buzzing. What do you want to know?" Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her knitting emerging from her bag, the needles clicking softly. "Just a chat, Mrs. Clement. You see so much from here, people passing, conversations. Has anything struck you about the hall's guests?" Mrs. Clement poured tea, her voice low with conspiracy. "Well, that Mr. Vance was in here 2 days ago, talking to a man I didn't know, sharp-looking, city type. They were hushed, but I heard codex mentioned, and something about a buyer in Amsterdam. Didn't like the look of it, if you ask me. And Mr. Poole, he's been jumpier than usual, dropping in for tea and staring out the window like he's expecting trouble." Miss Marple's needles paused, a rare interruption, as she absorbed the details. Vance's meeting suggested a motive beyond appraisal, perhaps a deal to sell the codex abroad. Poole's nervousness, meanwhile, aligned with his twitching tic, hinting at fear rather than guilt. She thought of her St. Mary Mead neighbor, Mrs. Price, whose furtive glances had once revealed a hidden debt, not a crime, but the principle. Held unease often pointed to secrets. "You're a treasure, Mrs. Clement," she said, sipping her tea. "One last thing, have you seen Professor Whitmore about? Perhaps posting letters or meeting anyone?" Mrs. Clement frowned, thinking, "Not meeting, no, but he was in here last week, scribbling in that notebook of his. Kept muttering about breaking the code. Looked half mad, if you ask me. Said something about a publisher needing proof. Didn't catch what." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the village whispers into her growing pattern. Whitmore's parcel, Vance's meeting, Poole's unease. The cloaked figure, these were fragments of a truth she was beginning to discern. She thanked Mrs. Clement, leaving a generous tip, and stepped back into the street, the village settling into its evening hush. As she walked toward Thornfield Hall, her knitting bag heavier with suspicion, Miss Marple reflected on the power of small places. St. Mary Mead, like the library, was a microcosm where human nature revealed itself in glances, whispers, and misplaced threads. The Codex Arcanum was hidden, but not far, and its thief, she was certain, was among those she'd met. With her quiet steps and sharper mind, she was closing in, one village whisper at a time. Chapter 9. The Blue Thread. The library of Thornfield Hall, as evening deepened into dusk, took on a somber air, its shadows lengthening across the polished floor like fingers reaching for secrets. Miss Jane Marple stood once more before the shattered glass case, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes tracing the contours of the crime's silent evidence. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow that caught the edges of the broken glass, and the room's silence was broken only by the distant creak of the house settling. She had returned here, after her village inquiries, to test the threads, both literal and figurative, that were beginning to form a pattern in her mind. The blue silk thread, found on the rug and mirrored on Mr. Poole's cuff and Mrs. Hartley's brooch, was a clue that nagged at her, its presence too deliberate to be mere chance. Miss Marple knelt, her movements slow but purposeful, and examined the rug again. The thread she had found earlier was gone, tucked safely into her pocket, but she searched for others, her gloved fingers brushing the intricate weave. Near the case's base, hidden in the shadow of a table leg, she found another, second, blue silk thread, its sheen unmistakable even in the dim light. She held it up, comparing it to the first, and noted their identical hue and texture, fine as a spider's web. "Curious," she murmured, slipping the new thread into her pocket beside its twin. 2 threads, in such precise locations, suggested not accident but intent, a breadcrumb trail meant to mislead. Rising, she turned her attention to the window, its latch still slick with oil, a detail that had lingered in her thoughts. She tested it again, finding it moved with a smoothness that spoke of recent care, yet the frost outside remained pristine, untouched by footprints. She closed her eyes, picturing the scene, a thief, gloved and silent, moving through the library, picking the lock with a practiced hand, leaving the window ajar as a false clue. The oil, she suspected, was a flourish, like the threads, meant to point to an outsider who never existed. Her mind drifted to her St. Mary Mead neighbor, Mrs. Lucy, whose garden theft had been solved by noting a too-perfect trail of mud leading away from the true culprit. Here, the clues felt similarly staged. She moved to the shelves, her eyes scanning the rows of books, their spines a testament to Sir Henry's eclectic tastes. The scuff on the shelf, noticed earlier, drew her back a faint mark where a heavy folio had been shifted. She pulled it out again, a treatise on heraldry, its weight suggesting it hadn't been moved far. Behind it, the shelf was clean, no dust to indicate long disturbance, but a faint indentation caught her eye, as if something had pressed against the wood briefly. A box, perhaps, or a hidden compartment. She tapped the panel, listening for a hollow sound, but it was solid. Still, the indentation was a clue, hinting at something concealed, if only briefly. Miss Marple's needles emerged from her bag, their rhythm a steady anchor as she paced the room, her thoughts weaving the village. Whispers with the library's evidence. The blue threads linked Poole and Mrs. Hartley, but their placement felt artificial, as if planted to cast suspicion. Poole's nervous tick and Mrs. Hartley's calculated charm suggested fear and deflection, but neither seemed bold enough for the theft's precision. Mr. Vance's pocket watch, with its potential for hidden tools, and his dawn sighting near the library pointed to opportunity. Yet his motive profit felt too obvious. Professor Whitmore's obsession, coupled with his parcel to a London publisher and his detailed knowledge of the Codex Arcanum's cipher, made him a compelling suspect, but his trembling hands spoke of agitation, not triumph. She paused by the fireplace, where the faint trace of fine ash had caught her attention before. Kneeling, she sifted through the embers with a poker, its tip still bent from some unknown use. The ash was gone, swept away by the maids, but her memory of it lingered too. Fine for wood, too delicate for coal. Paper, perhaps, or a fragment of vellum, burned to conceal evidence. She thought of Whitmore's notebook, its hurried sketches of alchemical symbols, and wondered if he had tested his theories with a page torn from the Codex. The parcel to Blackwood and Sons, sent days before the theft, was too early to contain the book itself, but it could hold notes, a transcription, or a plan. Sitting at a reading table, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her thoughts, Miss Marple considered the lock on the case. The scratch near the keyhole, barely visible, suggested a pick. Not brute force, a skill, requiring knowledge and practice. Whitmore's study of medieval mechanisms made him a candidate, but Vance's trade demanded similar dexterity, and even Mrs. Hartley's nimble fingers could not be discounted. Poole, with his intimate knowledge of the library, knew the lock's quirks, yet his fear seemed rooted in losing his position, not in guilt. The blue threads, she decided, were the key, not because they pointed to the thief, but because they pointed away. Someone had placed them, perhaps torn from Mrs. Hartley's brooch or a similar source, to implicate others. She recalled a St. Mary Mead seamstress, whose stolen fabric had been left at a crime scene to frame a rival. Here, the threads were a distraction meant to scatter suspicion like dust in the wind. The true thief, she suspected, was someone who knew the house, the case, and the suspects well enough to manipulate their weaknesses. Miss Marple rose, her knitting tucked away, and cast a final glance at the library. The Codex Arcanum was not far, she felt certain hidden in a room, a bag, or a concealed space within the hall. The village whispers had tightened the net. Whitmore's parcel, Vance's meeting with a mysterious buyer, Poole's unease, Mrs. Hartley's letters with a crest, and the cloaked figure by the south gate. Each was a note in a melody she was beginning to hear, and the blue threads were its false refrain. As she left the library, the house settling into its evening quiet, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The thief had planned meticulously, leaving clues to mislead, but they had underestimated her. In St. Mary Mead, she had unraveled mysteries by noting a misplaced teacup or a gardener's lie. Here, in Thornfield Hall, the stakes were higher, but the principle was the same. Human nature, with its greed and ambition, left traces no thief could erase. With her quiet steps and sharper mind, Miss Marple was closing in, one thread at a time. Chapter 10. The scholars slipped the dining room of Thornfield Hall, with its long mahogany table and candelabra casting a warm glow, was a stage set for revelation. The evening meal had been arranged at Miss Jane Marple's quiet suggestion, a gathering of all suspects under the guise of civility, where the tension of the theft might coax out truths. The table was set with fine china, the claret decanted, and the air heavy with the scent of roasted lamb and rosemary, yet the mood was far from festive. Sir Henry Grayson sat at the head, his face a mask of strained courtesy, while Mr. Poole, Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Vance, and Professor Whitmore took their places, each avoiding the other's eyes. Miss Marple, seated near Sir Henry, her knitting tucked discreetly beside her, observed them all with the serene attentiveness of a village spinster, her mind as sharp as the silver cutlery. The conversation began haltingly, with Sir Henry attempting to steer it toward neutral ground, whether the harvest anything but the Codex Arcanum. Yet the theft hung over them like a storm cloud, and Miss Marple, sipping her wine, waited for the moment to shift the tide. She had spent the day weaving the village whispers and library clues into a pattern, and tonight she intended to test it. The blue threads, the oiled latch, the parcel to London, the cloaked figure all pointed to a thief among them, and Professor Whitmore's obsession, coupled with his dry inkwell and hurried sketches, made him the focal point of her suspicions. "Professor Whitmore," she said at last, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze, "you spoke so vividly of the Codex yesterday. Its alchemical secrets must be a scholar's dream. I wonder, could you share a little more about its contents? It might help us understand why someone would risk so much to steal it." Whitmore, seated across from her, stiffened, his fork pausing midair. His gaunt face, lit by the flickering candles, seemed to tighten, his eyes burning with a familiar intensity. "The Codex Arcanum," he began, his voice low but fervent, "is a marvel of medieval thought. Its Latin passages describe processes distillation, calcination that hint at transmutation. But the ciphered sections, those are the true prize. They speak of an elixir, a formula for longevity, perhaps even immortality. I've studied its symbols for years, cross-referencing them with texts like the Turba Philosophrum." He leaned forward, his voice rising. "On folio 12, there's a passage, Sol et luna in aqua vita, the sun and moon in the water of life. It's a key, Miss Marple, to unlocking the rest." The table fell silent, the clink of cutlery stilled. Sir Henry's brow furrowed, and Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with interest, though her heart quickened. She had read Sir Henry's catalogue description of the Codex that morning, a private document shared only with her, and it noted that folio 12's passage was unpublished, known only to those who had handled the book itself. Whitmore's knowledge was a slip, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. "How remarkable," she said, her tone as mild as ever. "You recall the exact folio, Professor. You must have studied it closely last night." Whitmore's face paled, his hands trembling as he set down his fork. "Studied? I observed it, yes, when Sir Henry opened the case. I have a good memory for such things." His voice faltered, and he reached for his wine. The glass clinking against his lips, Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, though her mind was alight. She turned to Sir Henry, her voice conversational. "Sir Henry, you mentioned that the Codex has passages yet to be published. Was Folio 12 among them?" Sir Henry, caught off guard, nodded slowly. "Yes, it's one of the unpublished sections. Only those who've handled the book would know its details. I've kept the catalogue private to protect its value." His eyes flicked to Whitmore, a shadow of suspicion crossing his face. Mrs. Hartley, ever quick to deflect, laughed lightly, her sapphire brooch glinting. "Goodness, Professor, you must have a mind like a steel trap. I barely remember what I saw last night, such a blur of symbols." Her smile was charming, but her eyes were watchful, and Miss Marple noted the tension in her posture. Mr. Vance, swirling his wine, chimed in, his tone smooth. "A scholar's memory is a gift, isn't it? Though I'd wager the Codex's value lies more in its rarity than its secrets. £10,000, easily, to the right collector." His eyes met Whitmore's, a challenge veiled in civility, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in the scholar's gaze. Poole, silent until now, cleared his throat, his tick pulsing. "The Codex is more than money, Mr. Vance. It's history, preserved under my care. I checked the case last night, it was locked tight." His voice was defensive, and Miss Marple noted the blue thread still clinging to his cuff, a silent echo of the one in Mrs. Hartley's brooch. She leaned forward, her voice soft but deliberate. "It's curious, Professor, that you recall such a specific passage. I understand you've been working on a paper perhaps for Blackwood and Sons. Miss Pym mentioned a parcel you sent, rather urgently, a few days ago." Whitmore's fork clattered to his plate, his face ashen. "A parcel, yes, notes, my research notes. Nothing to do with the Codex. I've been studying alchemical texts. For years. It's coincidence, Miss Marple, nothing more." His voice was strained, his hands clenching, and the table's attention fixed on him. A spotlight he could not escape. Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, seemed to itch for motion, but she kept them still, her eyes gentle yet unrelenting. "Coincidence," she murmured. "How often they pile up in such cases. I once knew a gentleman in St. Mary Mead, a collector of rare stamps, who recalled details he shouldn't have known. It turned out he'd borrowed a stamp to study it without permission, of course." Her smile was disarming, but her words were a needle. Pricking at Whitmore's composure, he pushed back his chair, his voice rising. "Are you accusing me, Miss Marple? I'm a scholar, not a thief. The Codex is my life's work. I'd never steal it." His outburst drew gasps, and Sir Henry's hand tightened on his glass, his face a mix of shock and doubt. Miss Marple raised a hand, her tone soothing. "No accusations, Professor, merely observations. The Codex is a temptation, and scholars, like collectors, can be driven by passion." She paused, letting the words settle, then turned to the others. "Perhaps we might discuss the library's security again. Mr. Poole, you checked the windows, I believe." The shift in focus was deliberate, giving Whitmore a moment to stew while she watched the others. Poole nodded, his tick pronounced. "All secure, Miss Marple. The windows, the doors, nothing amiss." Mrs. Hartley offered a vague smile, her fingers brushing her brooch, while Vance checked his watch, his expression unreadable. As the meal continued, the tension lingered. Whitmore's slip a crack in the room's fragile harmony. Miss Marple ate sparingly, her mind weaving the evening's revelations with the village whispers and library clues. The blue threads, she suspected, were a distraction, planted to implicate Poole and Mrs. Hartley. Vance's dawn sighting and hidden watch compartment pointed to cunning. But Whitmore's knowledge of Folio 12, his parcel, and his obsession with the Codex's secrets made him the linchpin. She thought of a St. Mary Mead librarian, whose passion for rare books had led to a harmless theft. But Whitmore's stakes were higher. His ambition a fire that could burn away scruples. As the party dispersed, Whitmore's footsteps heavy on the stairs, Miss Marple remained, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a metronome. The Codex Arcanum was close, she could feel it, hidden in a scholar's luggage, or a secret nook. Whitmore's slip had illuminated the path, and, with her quiet persistence, Miss Marple was ready to follow it to the end. Chapter 11. The Confrontation, the Drawing Room of Thornfield Hall. Bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps, was a fitting arena for the denouement Miss Jane Marple had orchestrated. Its heavy velvet curtains were drawn against the October night, and the fire in the marble hearth cast flickering shadows across the brocaded walls, lending an air of quiet drama. The room's centerpiece, a long table strewn with decanters and crystal glasses, held an expectant stillness, as if it knew the secrets about to be unveiled. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles at rest in her lap, her black felt hat replaced by a simple lace cap that framed her white hair. Her mild blue eyes, deceptive in their gentleness, surveyed the assembled company. Sir Henry Grayson, his face etched with worry. Mr. Clarence Poole, twitching nervously. Mrs. Evelyn Hartley, her elegance tinged with unease. Mr. Roland Vance, his suave demeanor strained. And Professor Julian Whitmore, whose gaunt features were taut with barely concealed agitation. Sir Henry, at Miss Marple's request, had gathered them after dinner, ostensibly to discuss the theft's progress, though the air crackled with unspoken anticipation. Miss Marple had spent the day weaving her clues, the blue threads, the oiled latch, the village whispers, and Whitmore's damning slip at dinner into a tapestry that pointed inexorably to one truth. Now, with the suspects before her, she would unravel it, her quiet voice cutting through the fog of deceit like a needle through cloth. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone as soft as a village tea party's. "The theft of the Codex Arcanum has troubled us all, and I believe we are close to understanding how it was done and by whom." Her eyes crinkled with a smile, but there was steel beneath it, and the room's atmosphere tightened, each suspect shifting in their seat. Sir Henry cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly. "Miss Marple, if you've found something, please tell us. The police are baffled, and I can't bear this uncertainty." She nodded, her expression one of gentle reassurance. "Of course, Sir Henry. A theft like this requires three things: knowledge of the lock, access to the library, and a motive strong enough to risk ruin. Let us consider each in turn." She turned to Poole, whose tick pulsed visibly. "Mr. Poole, your devotion to the library is unquestioned. You know its every corner, its locks, its habits. The blue thread on your cuff suggested involvement, yet your distress seems genuine, a fear of losing your place, not of guilt. I suspect that thread was placed, perhaps torn from another's garment, to cast suspicion." Poole's eyes widened, relief mingling with his nervous twitch, and Miss Marple noted his shallow nod, as if a weight had lifted. Mrs. Hartley was next, her sapphire brooch glinting as she leaned forward, her smile tight. "Mrs. Hartley," Miss Marple continued, "your garden walk placed you near the library, and the thread in your brooch matched Mr. Poole's. Your story of a shadow was vague, a convenient distraction, yet your charm, while persuasive, feels like a shield. I believe you saw nothing that night, but your letters with a crest mentioned by Mrs. Clemens suggest personal troubles, not theft. The thread, like Mr. Poole's, was planted to mislead." Mrs. Hartley's fingers froze on her brooch, her eyes flickering with something like fear. But she said nothing, her silence a confirmation. Mr. Vance, polishing his pocket watch, met her gaze with a practiced smile. "Mr. Vance," Miss Marple said, her voice unwavering, "your trade gives you skill with delicate tools, and your watch, with its hidden compartment, could hold a lockpick. A maid saw you near the library at dawn, contradicting your claim of early retirement. Your meeting with a buyer in Amsterdam, as Mrs. Clement overheard, suggests a motive for profit. Yet your interest in the codex seems financial, not scholarly. And the theft's precision points to a deeper passion. Vance's smile faltered, his fingers tightening on the watch, but he remained silent, his eyes wary. Finally, she turned to Whitmore, whose hands clenched his notebook, his face pale as parchment. "Professor Whitmore," she said, her tone as gentle as ever, "your passion for the Codex Arcanum is evident. Your knowledge of its unpublished passages, folio 12. Sol et Luna in Aquavita, betrays a familiarity beyond last night's viewing. Your parcel to Blackwood and Sons, sent days before the theft, suggests a plan to publish its secrets as your own. The dry inkwell, the hurried sketches in your notebook, the cloaked figure Tommy saw by the south gate all point to you. You picked the lock, oiled the window to mislead, and hid the codex in your luggage, intending to claim its discoveries." Whitmore leaped to his feet, his voice a hoarse shout. "This is preposterous. I'm a scholar, not a criminal. The codex is my life's work. I'd never steal it." His hands trembled, his eyes wild, but the room's attention was fixed on him, the weight of her words undeniable. Miss Marple raised a hand, her calm unshaken. "Passion, Professor, can drive even the virtuous to folly. I once knew a curate in St. Mary Mead, whose love for rare manuscripts led him to borrow one without asking. Your ambition to unlock the Codex's cipher and publish its secrets overcame your scruples. The threads were your attempt to implicate others, but they were too obvious, like a poorly darned seam." Sir Henry's face darkened, his voice low. "Julian, is this true? Did you take it?" Whitmore's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. I only wanted to study it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The cipher, I was so close. I meant to return it after I'd transcribed it. I sent notes to my publisher, not the book. It's in my room, hidden in a false-bottomed case." His confession hung in the air. A confession wrung not by force but by the quiet pressure of Miss Marple's logic. Mrs. Hartley gasped. Vance's watch slipped from his fingers, and Poole's tick stilled, as if his fear had been vindicated. "Sir." Henry rose, his expression a mix of betrayal and relief. "We'll fetch it now," he said, his voice firm. "Miss Marple, you've done us a great service." She inclined her head, her smile modest. "Merely a matter of seeing what's there, Sir Henry. People, like books, reveal themselves in their details." As the group dispersed, Whitmore led away by Sir Henry, Miss Marple remained, her knitting untouched, her mind already turning to the next steps. The Codex Arcanum was found, but the threads of human nature, tangled and frail, would always weave new mysteries. Chapter 12. The Resolution, the Library of Thornfield Hall, restored to its solemn dignity, was bathed in the soft light of a new morning. The October sun filtering through the tall windows to illuminate the shelves of ancient volumes. The glass case, its shattered pane replaced, stood once more as the room's silent sentinel, and within it, the Codex Arcanum rested on its velvet cushion, its blackened leather binding gleaming as if untouched by the turmoil of its brief absence. Miss Jane Marple stood near the fireplace, her knitting bag at her feet, her lace cap a delicate crown atop her white hair. Her needles were still, a rare pause, as she surveyed the scene with a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the melancholy that always accompanied the unveiling of human frailty. Sir Henry Grayson, his face no longer etched with worry, stood beside the case, his hands clasped in gratitude. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm with relief, "you've saved more than a book. You've restored my faith in justice. The Codex is back where it belongs, thanks to you." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with a gentle smile, though her mind was still tracing the threads of the case. "You're very kind, Sir Henry, but it's merely a matter of listening to what people and places have to say." The library told its story, and the village added its whispers. The night before, after Professor Whitmore's confession in the drawing room, Sir Henry and a footman had accompanied him to his quarters in the East Wing, in a false-bottomed valise, hidden beneath a pile of scholarly journals. They found the Codex Arcanum, its pages unmarked, its secrets intact. Whitmore, his ambition laid bare, had crumbled under the weight of his own guilt. Admitting he had picked the library's intricate lock with a tool fashioned from his knowledge of medieval mechanisms, the oiled window latch, he confessed, was a deliberate misdirection meant to suggest an outside thief, while the blue silk threads torn from a ribbon in his notebook were scattered to implicate Mr. Poole and Mrs. Hartley, whose brooch had caught a similar thread by chance during the library viewing. Whitmore's motive, as Miss Marple had deduced, was not greed, but a scholar's desperation. He had spent years chasing the Codex's cipher, believing it held the key to alchemical breakthroughs that would cement his legacy. His parcel to Blackwood and Sons, sent days before the theft, contained a partial transcription of the Codex's symbols, gleaned from earlier visits to Thornfield Hall, and a proposal to publish its secrets as his own. The theft was a final, reckless act to secure the book long enough to complete his work. "I meant to return it," he had whispered, his voice hollow, as Sir Henry retrieved the grimoire. But his career was ruined, his reputation shattered, and the police, summoned by Sir Henry, took him away to face charges. Miss Marple had lingered in the library after the recovery, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Mr. Poole, exonerated, had resumed his duties with a fervor born of relief, his nervous tics subdued, though Miss Marple suspected he would never again trust his own vigilance. Mrs. Hartley, her charm intact but her secrets exposed, had admitted to receiving letters from a creditor, the crested envelopes hinting at financial strain rather than complicity in the theft. Her garden walk, she confessed, was a pretext to meet a courier in secret, not to spy on the library. Mr. Vance, his suave exterior cracked by the maid's sighting and the Amsterdam buyer's rumor, admitted to exploring a sale for Sir Henry, but denied any theft, his watch's compartment holding only a keepsake, not a tool. Miss Marple believed him, noting his greed was too calculated for the Codex's scholarly allure. Now, as Sir Henry locked the case with a new key, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her village, St. Mary Mead, where she had solved similar puzzles. By noting a misplaced glance or a Tugur alibi, "People," she said softly, almost to herself, "are so predictable in their desires. A book, a secret, a legacy they pull at the heart like threads in a tapestry, and sooner or later, they unravel." Sir Henry smiled, a touch of awe in his eyes. "You make it sound simple, Miss Marple, but without you, I'd have lost more. Then the Codex. How can I repay you?" She waved a hand, her smile modest. "A cup of tea, perhaps. When I next visit the hall, and do keep an eye on that locket. A clever one, but not clever enough." Her eyes twinkled, and she gathered her knitting bag, the needles clicking faintly as she tucked them away. As she stepped into the hall, ready to return to St. Mary Mead, the house seemed lighter, its shadows softened by the return of its treasure. The Codex Arcanum was safe, its secrets locked away. But Miss Marple knew that Thornfield Hall, like her village, would never lack for mysteries. Human nature, with its greed, ambition, and hidden frailties, was a book she could read as easily as any manuscript, and with her quiet steps and sharper mind, she would always be ready for the next chapter.